And when you have an already stressed situation, as you had in Syria, and then you add the extra stress of caused by climate change, in this case, the very prolonged drought that drove about 1.5 million people out of the rural areas of Syria into the cities, then you multiply that stress, and in this case, you multiplied it to breaking point.
But, I mean, many people will say, OK, a factor, but isn't the biggest stress, and we're talking Syria here, President Assad dropping barrel bombs on his own population?
Well, that's certainly the most immediate stress on Syria. But actually, one of the things that Assad failed to do as the drought got longer was, one, manage his water resources effectively, and two, deal with the fact that that reduced food security for people. And as we saw in the Arab Spring, once you get people really feel their food security is threatened, then life becomes very unstable indeed, which is what we've seen in Syria. So it's not that climate change was the cause, but it was part of the build-up of stresses that brought down or at least created the instability that Assad has been threatened by.
The Prince of Wales seems a little more definitive than that, though, and I get what you mean about you know, the build-up of the stresses, but higher up the list surely are, as we described there, President Assad's regime, the Arab Spring, ethnic tensions, a failing economy. Surely those are the main factors.
Well, those stresses had all been there for a very long time. I mean, the Assad regime have been managing to cope and keep the lid on all of the dissent inside Syria, right up until the point that the fourth year or so of drought drove those millions of refugees into the cities, not just into Damascus, but Aleppo and Homs and so on. And that's what led to, I think, the straw that broke the camel's back. And I think that's what the Prince was referring to.
Yeah. I mean, looking globally, climate change and population movements, population growth as well, I suppose, is that the main reason for these huge migrations we are now seeing, Europe being affected by one of them?
Yes, it is. I think it's now probably the most significant driver of big, massive migrations around the world. Particular place in question, for instance, a lot of tension on the border between India and Bangladesh, because climate change and rising sea levels are already driving people out of Bangladesh into India in large numbers.
And I mentioned there, is population growth then adding to those problems?
I think the population growth is beginning to peak, so we're beginning to see a slowdown. So it's not by now really the major driver. The really important driver is the fact that as people get more affluent and use more energy, they're accelerating the pace at which the climate is changing, because the energy currently is dominated by fossil fuels. So we need to get out of fossil fuels as fast as we can to slow down this process. If what we're seeing is, in a sense, the prelude to what a much warmer world would be, if you don't like this movie, you certainly won't like the sequel.
And do you agree with the Prince there? You know, I mean, how important is this summit in Paris? He's saying 15 years, indeed more, since these first summits started taking place. The temperature's still rising. Is this beginning to look like the last chance?
I wouldn't say it's the last chance. I think it's more importantly, I think we're beginning to go around a curve in which the level of political momentum has built up. The political risk of failing to act is growing, but the political risk of acting as the cost of renewables, of low carbon alternatives goes down, then we're beginning to see a change in the political equation. And I think what Paris will do is accelerate us round that curve.
OK, Mr. Burke. Interesting talking to you. Thank you very much indeed. Tom Burke there.